Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Friday's morning prayer reading and thoughts. Yesterday, there were some problems for some of you over inadequate volume, and I hope I've sorted that out today by having the microphone as close to my mouth as I can get it without you actually being able to see it. Looks a little bit like a cobra, actually, so it's rather unnerving if I look at it. So I won't look at it, I'll look at you instead. That's much nicer. Well, I'm going on with Hebrews today. I hope you found yesterday helpful. There's a bit of a risk with it. It sort of gives almost the rules for life. They're quite simplified, and he doesn't go into a huge amount of detail, but he picks out some very significant points. And they're very well worth listening to, and I imagine we'd agree with everything the writer says. But when I come to talk about them, I just had this feeling that I'm getting a bit preachy, and I hate doing that. But really, that's what this piece is. Perhaps it doesn't need talking about at all. But I hope you'll forgive me if I do sort of pick out some points which appeal to me and influence me and make me think carefully about how I live my life and about our church community and how I think it needs to be. I do hope that these short pieces that John and I are offering to you are in some way helpful. You're kind enough to say that they are, but do let us know if in some way you feel that you would like them to be different, or maybe you would actually prefer just for us to go through the morning prayer service without a talk. But we're always open to ideas, suggestions and criticism, and we will take it seriously and without offence. Okay, let's begin our reading then, and it is from the very last chapter of Hebrews, chapter 13, all bar the last few verses, and it is, as I say, this guideline to how to live the Christian life. Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them. Those who are being tortured, as though you yourselves were being tortured. Let marriage be held in honour by all, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. So we can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me? Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Do not be carried away by all kinds of strange teachings, for it is well for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by regulations about food, which have not benefited those who observe them. We have an altar from which those who officiate in the tent have no right to eat. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore Jesus also suffered outside the city gate in order to sanctify the people by his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp and bear the abuse he endured. For here we have no lasting city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. Through him, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of lips that confess his name. Do not neglect to do good, and share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Here ends our reading. So for the second day, I've chosen a passage from Hebrews. Today, as you've heard, it was chapter 13, the last chapter in that book, and you've heard all but the last 2 or 3 verses. I said yesterday that I'm rediscovering it. Interestingly, I was talking on the phone to our team rector, Chris, this morning, and we asked one another how we were getting on in these strange times. Among the relatively trivial things I told him was that John and I were making morning prayer broadcasts which we're posting online. And I told him that I'd switched from Exodus to Hebrews. "Ooh, that's rather heavy stuff, isn't it?" he said. So it wasn't just I who had that impression. I thought I would check the lectionary to see how many times a part of the letter to the Hebrews is actually appointed to be read in the communion service on Sunday mornings in the current year, because that's normally when we hear the Bible readings, isn't it? And the answer is only twice. Now, to be fair, I hadn't looked at the other 2 years of the 3-year cycle of our readings to see whether Hebrews was more prevalent in them, but it's little wonder that my acquaintance with the letter is sketchy. I must have read it in training, I suppose, but my memory is famously not the best unless I go over things time and time again. Anyway, I've read it all again now, and I enjoyed it, really. Now, today's passage is the last chapter, bar a few verses. I'm very taken with the first half of it. It starts with mutual love. And let's face it, love, and preferably mutual love, is at the very core of what we are as a Christian community. It's Christ's most direct command to us, his disciples. Love one another as I have loved you. We can't pay lip service to Christian love. We can't feign it. We've got to do it. And sometimes that means working at it, don't you find? I know I'm really repeating what I said yesterday in a sense. We're all different. We all have an easy affinity with some people, while we find others difficult to feel drawn to. And let's admit, there are times when it is hard to love, and also that there are times when we are hard to love. When we gather together in church once more, let's be more determined than ever to see in each other what God sees in each one of us: kindness, gentleness, patience, goodness, generosity, God-given talent, humility, and vulnerability. We all have those things in varying quantities, but we all have them. Let's be ready to forgive as quickly as possible when we're irritated, annoyed, or offended. It may mean sometimes being open about why we're irritated, annoyed, or offended. Sometimes plain speaking, if it's justified, is a good way to move forward. We at St. Mark's are a church family blessed with good relationships, but we can always do better. As it says in St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. I think we should apply this to the communion rail too. Whether we're annoyed or annoying, it's reconciliation we need. The writer of this letter to the Hebrews gives such good advice for Christian living. We've just thought about how we as members of the church family should treat one another, but it has to go further, he says. We might put it slightly differently and substitute for the word angels, which he uses, Jesus Christ himself. And we don't know when Christ will come again, or how he will look. And it's unlikely that we'll recognize him at first sight. So he might just be that person you bump into in the street, or in the supermarket queue. Remember those? Or sitting outside on a blanket. Male or female, European or Asian, American or African, rich or poor, ragged or smart, well-groomed or dishevelled. Hard though it is, we should treat everyone as though they were Christ, because they might just be. Let's turn to Matthew's Gospel again. In chapter 25, he quotes Jesus as saying, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. The writer of the Hebrews wants to drum that lesson home. It's not the way the world lives, sadly. We have to be different. The fruit of our loving behaviour towards others will be that they are drawn not only to us, but more importantly to Christ. And drawing people to Christ is what he charges us to do. I began, as the writer does, by talking about love. Forbidden as we are to go to our church at the moment and implored to keep a good distance from everyone else, let's go on showing our love for each other as best we can. Keep phoning, keep waving, out of open windows if you can, keep smiling, keep writing, and we'll keep the fires of love burning until life returns to normal. So my love to you all and God's blessing. Next week, remember, there's no morning prayer. Instead, we're going to have Compline, that's night prayer, on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. On Thursday evening, Jane will be with us to celebrate an Iona Holy Communion with us, and she suggests that you have some bread and some wine or some other drink available so that at the moment when she actually takes communion, you can take it with her. And then on Friday morning, I will be giving the Good Friday meditation, a bit longer than a morning prayer, but with plenty of space in it for quiet contemplation and prayer. So we look forward to being with you every day at some point next week. But for now, bye-bye.